Health Education and Teaching Corp, teaching about COVID-19 to over 20,000 students around the world. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing so I can turn it over to Dr. G.
Awesome. Can you guys see me? You're good? Robin, do I get a thumbs up? Robin, I like your background, by the way, too. Fantastic. Very scholarly. So I was excited when I was invited to come and speak to you all. And I believe Robin may have been one of the people last week just emailing me being like, how do you plan to present to these amazing human beings on the call today? And I made it clear, I was like, if it's meant to be really just conversational, so I can answer in real time your questions. So, drop them in the chat, unmute, but I love the fact that I also came in as you guys were doing this great activity, but I'm going to talk honestly for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I really this is meant for you to gain what you need in an understanding of how we got here, where we are, and how do we get out of this, right? So I know you were interested a little bit about myself, but just to give you guys a little bit of confidence that this guy knows what he's talking about. I am a lung and critical care doctor. So I've managed patients before they had COVID. So through my lung clinic, I've managed patients in the intensive care unit with COVID. And I'm one of the few physicians at Hopkins, at Johns Hopkins, if not across the United States, who manages post-COVID-19 patients. So patients who had COVID-19 and are continuing to really suffer the consequences of it. And we're there to kind of help them out. And I say all this because it kind of always reaffirms to me that the best way really to manage COVID-19 is to just not get COVID-19. So there's a couple of things I want to just kind of really make sure we have a good understanding of how did we get here, right? How did we come to this public health crisis of a pandemic? And I really want to make sure that we understand that because, from a standpoint of just overall just science literacy, it's good to know how we got here, even if science isn't a big thing on your end day to day. So one of the things I try to always tell people, the first way we got here is the fact that this virus really it's new. And not just new to humans, but just kind of new to some extent to our immune system, right? So something specifically into the humans. And the way this tends to happen in Mother Nature is usually when we get what's called a spillover situation. So meaning it's a virus that lives probably just fine in certain animals, but in other animals, it can cause disease. So that spillover really labels this virus as something called a zoonotic virus. The first three letters being ZOO, but you probably like, oh, that's a zoo. Exactly, it's just Greek for animal. Why this is key for us in this conversation about a pandemic is our immune system is fantastic second time around. First time around, it's like trying to figure out what's going on. It's kind of like your students with a pop quiz. They're probably not going to do well. But if you give them time to memorize something and give them the same test a week later, they'll pass with flying colors, hopefully. So same thing with this virus, right? The first time around, it's not, our immune systems will do our best. Second time around, we got this. We will gladly know how to combat this virus. So zoonotic viruses, by the way, other than smallpox, it's really been, smallpox has been around for 3,000 plus years, but every virus that's emerged and caused a public health crisis has always been zoonotic. HIV, right? H1N1, right? So I can continue rattling them off, but this is important, right? The more we interact with animals, the more likely we are to have more and more spillover events. So that was key ingredient number one. The second ingredient to actually really allow more of a pandemic was that asymptomatic spread, right? Its predecessors, right? Coronaviruses, for the most part, did cause some public health concerns in the 21st century, right? 2003 with SARS-CoV, and then 2013 with MERS-CoV. And you're like, well, what was the vaccine that got rid of them? There wasn't. We just stopped them with infectious control policies, face masking, physical distancing. But really the key ingredient there was that they only spread when you had symptoms. If you had a good cough or sneeze, yeah, that's how you were spreading it. The asymptomatic spread here with this virus is really kind of an insidious variable because it allowed people to be like, I feel great. What do you mean I'm spreading and shedding the virus in real time? And so that was a massive curveball to the biology of this virus. And a lot of it had to do with how its spike proteins really kind of adapted in a more efficient way to bind to receptors that are found really throughout the body, but much more dense in the lungs, those ACE2 receptors. Finally, key ingredient number three. This one is the one that is always going to cause kind of a bit of human conflict. So what is it? So it dates back, it kind of has, we have to get in the mind of a virus. What's the purpose of a virus? purpose of a virus is not to do us harm. It does a virus no good, right? If a human wanted to make more humans, it does that with humans. If a cat wants to make more cats, it does it with cats. If a virus wants to make more of itself, it can't just do that. It can't just go off to another virus and it's like, hey, let's make more. It can't. Viruses need another living organism to make more of themselves. Knowing that, it means the best way a virus can just keep making more and more and more of itself is if it creates kind of a nice symbiotic relationship with that living entity. And knowing that, it means like, well, if a virus actually causes more of an infection, causes that animal to, or living thing to pass away, guess what? The virus goes down with it. So this is really, a big conversation piece because viruses like the Ebola virus, Ebola will never become a pandemic. I promise you. It will cause a lot of concern, don't get me wrong. But with an 80% mortality rate, the ship goes down along with the virus, right? So it in of itself will struggle to ever claim a pandemic. When you have a virus that has enough of a mortality rate, meaning usually something greater than 1%, but less than 10%, that's kind of the golden window for a virus in order to kind of spread, but also cause concern, right? Because if this virus had a 0% mortality rate, then that's the common cold, and we live on with our lives. But once you start getting above 1%, suddenly what that's going to do, depending on the region you live in, it's going to overwhelm a healthcare system. So key ingredient number 3 for something to become a pandemic is enough of a mortality rate that it causes a health concern, right, from a resource standpoint, but not too much of a mortality rate that literally it's going to wipe out every human it touches, because then the virus will just go down with the humans. And so that's key here, right? Because if you think about your own regional hospital, the most it's got 300 beds, right? Here in Baltimore City, we have about close to 1,500 to 2,000 total beds for a city that's a little over 1 million people. That's not a lot of beds. In an usual day and time, that's plenty. If you get a pandemic, we're going to be overwhelmed, right? So that's the key here. And I love that you guys were talking about flattening the curve because that's the key, right? This virus, most people can survive it. The majority will. You just need to make sure you have the resources to allow you the fighting chance to do just that. One of the saddest parts of my own career was when I had to create an intensive care unit bed in a hallway in order to help a patient because we just didn't have the rooms. We didn't have the staff either. So that's key in a pandemic. Those are 3 ingredients I had to think of. Another infection just aligns them. You're going to get that happening again. So how do we get out of this? Well, it will be great. Infectious control policies are great to kind of prevent. We did away with 2 other coronaviruses that way, but this is tough, right? And I mean this, the asymptomatic spread, my heart goes out to people. Like it creates a kind of a false sense of security. Like, well, I feel great. How could I have something? Keep in mind, a lot of the most diabolical viruses, that's how they used to spread. If you think about HIV, its predominant spread was when patients just didn't feel symptoms. They felt great. So the asymptomatic spread will always be kind of a curveball to infectious control barriers, right? Face masking and physical distancing. Well, then the other option is, well, what if we had a cure, right? Because we have tons of bacteria out there that cause harm. And we don't shut the world down for it because we have good antibiotics right now. There's an asterisk. So if any of you are infectious control people, you're like, well, Dr. G, not so fast. But if we had a cure, this will be a game changer. And to this date, we really don't. Viruses are tough because unlike bacteria that really don't need us, right? They can just grow and grow and grow by themselves. That's easier to kill off. Viruses are tough because once they invade your cell, it's really hard to kind of navigate a weapon towards that. Third way is actually doing something that we've been doing for actually hundreds of years. It's just, remember talking about your immune system? If your immune system would recognize this bugger, it'd be fine. It'd destroy it. That's a vaccine. That technology dates back to late 18th century with Dr. Edward Jenner in England. By the way, the word vaccine even comes from the Latin or Spanish or Italian and so forth, word for cow, right? Because he took cowpox, pus from cowpox, and cut a little boy's arm, a little 8-year-old boy, and he put the pus of the cowpox into the kid's arm. That kid never got smallpox. So the term vaccine, coined 100 years later, is just kind of like an ode to cows, right? And cowpox and how it helped us stop smallpox. But we've known about this, right? Ottoman Turks did this in the 16th century to help their soldiers. George Washington vaccinated his own soldiers, during the Revolutionary War. Like we know how to get in front of Mother Nature with this, right? We know if you have a bit of immunity, given to you through something that doesn't cause the disease, you can be one step ahead, right? So to me, it's one of the great founding things out of science that kind of puts us ahead of Mother Nature as she keeps throwing at us constant infections and so forth. In the vaccine, we can spend as much time as you guys need in order to ask as many questions to feel completely confident with what's going on with the vaccines. But the one thing I will always sit back and say is, if you want the one intervention around COVID-19 that's been tested on thousands of people in the research world, thousands of people, and followed for the longest period of time, it's the vaccine. You don't get that with a variety of other interventions that we've studied. Actually, you get it on a lot less. So with that said, and Robin, you can tell me if you want me to tackle anything else or just dive right into the questions, because I imagine we're going to get tons. What do you think, Robin?
Well, I'm helping to moderate the questions, so I can.
Let's get to them.
Yeah.
Oh,
so we have a question. Sorry. How worried are you about a variant that jumps the current vaccine protections?
So, variants. Let's talk about variants real quick and mutations. So, and I know how this is going to come off, so bear with me. But if any of you have children, from a genetic standpoint, they're technically mutations, variants, right? So what I'm trying to allude to, living things make mutations. They're just genetically a little bit different. They're not a different species. So mutations happen all the time. And they happen a lot in coronavirus, right? The virus that I breathe in is not the same one that I breathe out. It takes a little bit of me with it, right? That's why you can genetically contact trace a virus back or trace these variants. And really the fact that we're around Delta, I know we were up to Lambda, I know you guys are learning the Greek alphabet in real time. But unlike the flu, this is a relatively small changing virus. And a lot of it has to do with it's got one long strain of genetic material versus your flu that has that genetic material but chopped up. So you just have a lot more probability to make variances that you just really need a more novel vaccine, meaning you get one every year. So how worried am I? I am worried. And this is why, right? If everyone just, for instance, got the antidote and had some level of immunity to stop this virus in real time, this virus stops, right? No more variances and so forth. The longer you let this thing go on, and I don't mean just like, in some part of the world, anywhere, the more you allow this virus to continue to grow and grow and grow and mutate, you will get a variant at some point in time that's going to outsmart the vaccines. Actually, my bigger fear isn't even just outsmarting the vaccines. At some point, you may create a variant that outdoes children, right? That would be everyone's biggest nightmare. I brought that up to my 7-year-old, not to frighten her, but she keeps asking me about COVID, and it's on her mind. And that's where every virologist, every infectious disease doctor, and every doctor is just holding their breath. If you get a variant that's more diabolical to children, I mean, it's a big game changer. So am I worried? I am. Do I think it's probable? I don't right now with good increase of vaccination and immunity that we're giving out. But do I think it's possible? It is. So how worried am I? I can tell you it's enough that about once a day I think about it. Doesn't keep me up at night, but it definitely gets me, concerned at the moment. So good question. Back to you, Amber.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Another question, how is it possible that different companies have different information about whether their vaccine is effective?
Yeah, so vaccine companies and effectiveness. So at the end of the day, vaccine companies are companies. Like I know they're trying to do a humane good, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, they still have their own, capitalistic interests. So meaning to level the playing field, they have to submit, if they want FDA approval for emergency use or approval just for overall use, you got to give us the data you have, meaning don't oversell it, just give us the plain data. Meaning the FDA gets their data and the FDA draws the conclusions from that. So from my standpoint, right now we have 3 vaccines here in the United States, 4, sorry, because the Novavax just got approved, or is getting approved. So we're going to have 3 to 4 vaccines that are approved for FDA use for emergency use. And I'll tell you what that means, by the way, because some people are like, well, if it's not FDA approved in real time, I'm not going to take it. I'll tell you what that means. So meaning if you just Google the information, or Amber, I can give you the links, the pages that they gave to the government right? 50 plus pages for Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. I don't think I have Novavax's yet. That's put together with government officials who they in real time review the data. That's the data, right? Meaning, so companies may have their own kind of spin to kind of sell a vaccine, but at the end of the day, you know, the way the FDA did this was having a non-biased party review it, review the data, help them put it together and submit. So from my standpoint, those data entries, that to me is the gospel that I take away of how effective their vaccines are. Now, in regards to vaccine effectiveness, a couple things. The vaccine's job is to just prevent severe illness. It is not meant to stop transmission. No vaccine ever tries to attempt that because it's just too hard. It's like a vaccine, think of a vaccine like a good goalkeeper, right? A goalie doesn't stop the hockey puck from coming to them. It just prevents it from getting into the goal. In order to stop the hockey puck, you just need a lot of people vaccinated. So anyway, so the purpose of the vaccine is just to stop severe illness, right? Because if the vaccines can convert SARS-CoV-2 into just a common cold, we win. We won. That's game over. We got it. So that's what all the data is supposed to submit. And honestly, as long as the vaccine is somewhat like 60%, if not more effective in preventing severe disease, we're fine. Especially if you get enough people vaccinated, then you should be fine. If only one person sitting around with that, it's tough. But if you get enough people, then you're good. And Pfizer, Moderna did that with the original variant, and Johnson & Johnson was pretty darn good too, as well, around 85%. So with that said, from my standpoint, all the stuff that they put out, I'm always going to go back to what they've submitted to the FDA. And we keep that updated in real time for these other variants as well as data comes back. Meaning if it's data just from Pfizer, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt. I want a non-biased party to review it and then let them tell me what they found. So that information does become publicly available. Last thing I'll say, by the way, emergency use versus real-time approval is just timing, right? For a vaccine to get approved by the FDA, it needs 6 months worth of data. That's fine. 6 months worth of data would have put us to March to submit everything of 2021. We're in a pandemic. So of course we're like, yeah, you get 3 months worth of data, that's early enough to submit for emergency use. Keep in mind though, that's data from phase 3 trials. You already had phase 1 and phase 2 that had usually about 6 months plus worth of data. So you could pull from that a little bit. So that's it, it's just timing. All of these vaccines, well, Pfizer and Moderna are eligible now for FDA full approval, and I think they're submitting for that. But just keep that in mind. It's just timing. That's all it is.
Thank you very much. And the flood has come in of all sorts of questions, so I'm kind of pulling some of them together. I know one of the things that is concerned for us teachers, Arizona has removed the mask requirements. Schools can no longer require masks. And there is concern, how can we protect ourselves in the coming months, considering that children can't be vaccinated? And bouncing off of that, any ideas or speculation as to when children could be vaccinated, those under 12?
Yeah, so I think we'll probably get 5 and older sometime this fall. So like when vaccine trials happened, I promise you, kids and adults were being enrolled in real time at the same time. Just pediatric vaccine trials just take a lot longer to go through because of a lot more red tape. And that's fair to say, right? But like if you guys have ever been enrolled in a study as an adult, you're like, all right, I'm gonna sit you down for about 10 to 15 minutes, tell you risks and benefits, and you sign on a dotted line. Pediatrics is a little bit different. They do that like several times. And actually the child, regardless of age, has to show some level of understanding of what they'll get themselves into. So meaning you can have like half a dozen clinical visits before the child even gets enrolled into the trial. So it just takes a lot longer for pediatric vaccine trials to get in, right? Because you really want really good understanding of the consent process. And there's other like parts that they stop and so forth. So I am confident we'll probably get 5 and older this fall. Now, how to stay safe knowing there's still a large population that's not vaccinated, especially our children? There's a couple of things that I'd like to draw back on to give me peace of mind here. So in all fairness, your children are going to get COVID-19 likely through the people they interact with. So if they're going to interact with adults who are vaccinated and aren't taking the proper infectious control policies. And by the way, like I want to make it clear, like you can fight COVID-19, yes, with immunity through the vaccine, or just taking the proper precautions to not catch it. Because there are people who just can't get the vaccine for health reasons and so forth, and I want to be mindful of that. I have my own patients who can't, right? But they are doing everything possible to not catch COVID-19, because while it may not affect them, it could affect a child that they pass it on to, or could affect another adult. So we want to be mindful of that, right? You want to be mindful that every person who's passed away from COVID probably caught it from someone that it didn't impact, right? Once you start laying that kind of groundwork into anyone's mind, you're like, I may be responsible for someone else's passing away if I catch COVID. So knowing that, children are most likely to get it from another adult. So meaning, what can we do? Well, we can, vaccine is one way to protect the children, right, from passing it on. And keep in mind, smallpox. I'm bringing this up again because there was an entire generation of adults who ended smallpox without that vaccine ever making it into the arms of little children, right? And even though it was much more deleterious to kids, it was adults that ended it. And so we can step up and do the same thing. But until then, right, so a couple things. So if for our children who are not yet vaccinated, I think it's up to every adult and business that they work with to take that on. And here's my recommendation. I would still probably promote face masking in those environments, right? Because adults, if say you got a mild case of COVID, right? It's just a runny nose and you thought nothing of it, right? And it wasn't even enough to keep you home. And so you still showed up. And if you got a runny nose at work and you're passing those germs on to kids, they're likely to catch COVID. So from my standpoint, I would probably still promote face masking. Now, this is my recommendation and others may have it as well, but that's how I would view this, right? When you're working with a population that's not vaccinated, I would still take the proper precautions from your end to not pass that on. Do the kids warrant face masks? I would say, I know that's a struggle in of itself, but I probably would use that to be kind of a last barrier. 6 feet apart, maybe, I think it's just the practicality. I think it's good to say on paper, but hard to probably implement. But from my standpoint, I would try to promote face masking as much as possible until this is really behind us. Now, saying that, how do we know it's behind us? That's the other tricky part. It's got to be taken by region, and not just COVID numbers, right? Because keep in mind, like here in Maryland, we still get a lot of COVID cases, but our hospitalizations have dropped off. What that means to me is we've converted COVID in Maryland to a common cold. That's awesome. So it's really about how your hospitals are doing. If your hospitals are being overwhelmed, then you still have a very severe case of COVID still running around. So long story short, how to approach the children? I probably would still wear face masks. I would try to encourage staff to get vaccinated, and do it in a mindful way, right? That's the most important thing. You want to give people the information so they can make the best decision for themselves. Do that, and hopefully people do the right thing. And the best way to not spread COVID to a child is to not give COVID to a child and not have you have it as well. So follow those infectious control policies, promote the vaccination, or at least promote the science of the vaccination to make people make the best decision. And finally, keep a close eye on regionally what is happening, right? Not just the COVID numbers, because if you have a high vaccine rate in your community, you may still have high COVID numbers. It's just that the severity of cases are low, that's the victory. You convert this bugger into a common cold, we won.
All right, thank you so much. So we're going to keep going, and we actually got a little bit of extra time, so I hope that still works because we have a flood of questions and we'd love to keep them going. I'd like to roll into some myth busting. Are there any vitamins or supplements that someone can purchase over the counter to deal or treat?
Yeah, so this is tough, right? Because it's like, we want to be as prepared as possible. And I can tell you, like, the opposite is true, right? If you're oftentimes dehydrated individual and that's malnourished, you will likely not do well against this virus. But if you just have a stable diet, reasonable amount of fruit servings a day and vegetables and so forth, you'll be fine. Like, meaning overnutrition doesn't seem to provide any benefit. Undernutrition does. So if you feel like maybe malnourished and dehydrated pretty frequently, like, try to rev up. The one thing I will say, by the way, is, I want a quick fix as well. I get it. Vitamins sound great. I really trust Mother Nature a lot more. So if you can get your vitamins and minerals through just fruits, vegetables, the natural way, because it's not just delivering you, for instance, the vitamin C, it's delivering you all the buddies of vitamin C that make it much more effective. We've proven that countless times. Vitamin C from a tablet, the only people I would ever recommend that to are those like actively suffering from scurvy. Otherwise, just get it from a natural form. It's much more potent. that fashion. So if you're malnourished, start revving it up. Otherwise, just stick with a good nutritious diet and you should be fine.
Thank you. How about concerns about fertility? Does the vaccine cause fertility issues?
Ooh, so this is a great question. So by the way, the opposite is true. COVID 100% does. We actually, so in our post-COVID clinic, we have a lot of males, for instance, who we've seen blood vessel damage to the pelvic region, right? And, and to the penile area. So it's actually been pretty, it's a rather complicated cases that we have to work with urology about this. But the vaccine in of itself, we have not seen fertility issues. And we can say that with a good level of confidence. So for women of childbearing age specifically, there is a lot of vaccine registries after they get it, they can sign up for. And to date, we have not seen the vaccine cause fertility issues that, so there is a certain percentage of fertility issues that we expect in the general population at all time. And as long as that never exceeds, then we just say, all right, life is going as usual as it is. So to date, there's been a little over 100,000 registries of female got it of childbearing age, and then she took the initiative to go and register herself. We have not seen fertility issues arise. So it gives us a big confidence that this is safe for women getting the vaccine. In the vaccine trials, a lot of young women became pregnant. So we follow them as well, since they enrolled in trials. But trials really aren't done at least in the pandemic of like, let me go find girls, men and women, or predominantly female of childbearing age, get them the vaccine, those won't, and then we follow them. That would take too long a period of time. What we do instead is rely on real world data and try to get people to kind of encourage to share their information back and forth. So no infertility issues that we have come about. But like I said, the opposite is true. By the way, COVID, the scariest patients I've had with COVID and pregnancy. I've always had bad cases. The child usually has been fine. It's always been the mom. I mean, there's been, so you really want, again, this virus is not one to mess around with. And COVID and pregnancy have been by far the scariest cases that we've seen.
Wow, thank you for that information. Kind of continuing with where we can go and what we can do. What's it looking like for booster shots?
Yeah, so was that, I feel like I was just asked that question. Oh, earlier, maybe it was with you guys. So booster shots, like I think I said it earlier. Oh my gosh. Or else if I said it to another group, great. So right now, do I think we'll need booster shots in the foreseeable future? Sure, but not right now. I think we're good. Like right now, if you got your vaccine, you should still be good to go. Encourage your friends and family who have not, and again, in a non-judgmental, non-stigma manner, sharing with them the science in a manner that can be persuasive for them. But right now, I do think in some time we'll need a booster, but it's not the case at this moment. I think we're still fine with it.
In regards to research, are they still doing sewage examinations as well as contact tracing?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, until we're not a pandemic, we're doing all of that. Even in regions that are high in vaccine rates, we still do contact tracing just because, again, if we get a breakthrough, we want to be cognizant of that. So all of that is still being done. Yes.
All right. And then kind of continuing the research side of things, I'll just read the question directly. You mentioned earlier about flattening the curve. We've heard other experts saying we need to stop focusing on flattening the curve. What is your advice for us to decipher all the messages we are hearing, and how do we know who is reliable?
Right. So the flattening the curve is the strategy from a public health standpoint meant to help the healthcare system when we really have no other means, right? You get a new virus, once we kind of learn how it spreads, then we tackle that. Like if this was a GI bug and it spread through sewage and so forth, then we have a different conversation. But this was airborne. This takes advantage of human interactions where we like to get close to people and talk to them for countless minutes and so forth. Maybe not my introverted friends, but others, yes. So yeah, flattening the curve is really our strategy up front where we have no weapons at all. All we have really is prevention. Where we're at now, to each their own. I still think it's important to flatten the curve in regions that have a low vaccine rate, right? For whatever reason. Like if you have no ability to get the antidote to get you out of the pandemic, then you should work on infectious control policies that prevent the spread of this virus, right? So if you're in a region that for whatever reason doesn't have the antidote and has like one hospital with 5 beds in it, right? There are rural areas in the US like this, then you better work on not spreading this virus. However, if you have the vaccine at home readily available, then yeah, I understand where the shift of conversation is, talk about the science to persuade the community about the vaccine. So from my standpoint, I think it just depends on the region by region. At the end of the day, we all want this to either slow the spread where it doesn't exist anymore, or just convert it into the most harmless thing in the world. And you can get the latter through the vaccine. You can get the former by infectious control policies. You just need to know where are you in your region and what resources do you have. Does that help, Amber? Was that okay?
Absolutely. So we are going to be coming up to the end of our time, and the last kind of theme is a bit on the chunky side. So getting into the mRNA vaccine. So first, how is it different? Are there any potential dangers and concerns such as autoimmune or muscle issues associated? How can we possibly address that and help pass on what's really going on?
Love it. So this is a great question. Right. So vaccines, I told you, have been around, the concept of it, for about 200 years. Right. We are not grabbing Amber and taking a large, like Crocodile Dundee style knife, cutting her, and then putting pus into her arm in order to provide her immunity from an infection. Right. We've come a long way since then. Right. So right now we have a lot of vaccine technologies that are coming out. Like, to me, it's, you had the T Ford model for cars. 100 years later, you got a Tesla, right? Technology advances. And a lot of it is just because we find more efficient ways of creating something. Vaccine technology, one of the challenges we always had is, like if you have a virus, like the hardest part is, can you identify something with a virus that is different from human beings, right? So we can separate it. And then how do you get enough of that different protein into our body so we can recognize it and form a kind of immune system against it, an immunity? The second part is hard, right? Because it literally is dissecting out that protein. So Novavax, for instance, what it did was take the gene of the protein, put it into a cell from moths, those little buggers that fly around at night, and those cells just made more of the protein. Then you sucked it up in a syringe and you injected that into a human. Tons of proteins, and we recognize it and move on. The challenge with that is it's a very quick situation, right? So the vaccine works, but it's it's a very delicate situation because you have to wait pretty long for those cells to make enough of the protein. That's why by far this is the longest vaccine making that we have. It's like baking a cake forever. The Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca kind of used an old technology. You take a virus that does nothing to you and use it like a Uber, and it transports the protein and shows it off. That's it. So we've actually used, it's called a viral vector. Vector just implies it's like an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi. We've used that technology actually for decades, actually for a lot of genetic therapies, right? Where if a child was born without a certain gene, we can give that gene back to him or her through viral vectors. Pretty clever. And then you have the Tesla, the mRNA vaccines. And you got to understand, like, as a scientist, this is exciting because this is by far the most efficient way of making a vaccine. Everything, as I told you, is all about identifying the protein and then trying to remove it. You guys got to understand, that is hard and it takes time. mRNA is like, all right, I identify the protein. How do I make it? Oh, those are the genetic blocks? Great. I just punch that into a computer, grab those nucleic acids, put them together, I'm done. And those nucleic acids can come from any source. They can come from plant-based and so forth. All it is just arranging them in the constellation of the letters, coding, that puts out that protein. So I put that genetic material into me, goes into one of my cells, it makes it, boom, suddenly I have the protein available, and I keep making more and more and more of it. Like, that in of itself is ingenious, because I promise you, moving forward, a lot of breakthrough therapies are going to come out of mRNA technology, because coding is so much more of an efficient process. And I say this because when SARS-CoV hit in 2003, we had no coronavirus vaccines. Like, we were starting from scratch. Within 3 years, the mRNA vaccine was ready, where things like Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca's, Novavax's weren't even in research trials yet. I say this because being able to make the protein and keep it stable takes time. The genetic coding is just an ingenious way of getting you something very quickly. And nucleic acids are pretty harmless. I mean, we eat them all the time. If you've eaten anything, plant-based or animal-based, you're eating nucleic acids in real time. And the other kicker to this, all right, you have an efficient process, but is it effective? Yeah, it's the only one that's like more than 90% effective. I mean, that's just because of it's probably the potency there. It's just because of the ability to like have us make the protein rather than relying on the injection of it or the viral vector that it could degrade in real time. So with that said, side effects. By all means, this one has the most side effects, not serious ones, just side effects, meaning more muscle aches, more, fevers and so forth. So I want to say something real quick to these side effects. If I told you I can get you healthy, but you're going to break out into sweats, you're going to get short of breath, and your muscles are going to ache, probably for about a day. You would look to me, Amber, and you'd be like, I don't want that. And I'm like, that's just exercise, my friend, right? That's like going to the gym. It's like Pelotoning for 45 minutes. My muscles are still aching from Cody's class yesterday, okay? Right? We put our bodies through a lot. We rev it up in order to promote health afterwards. That's all the vaccine does. It's going to make you uncomfortable for a short period of time. And then ultimately you do fine, right? It's transient. Can it hold potential for causing autoimmune disorders? I don't know that. I mean, to form an autoimmune disorder, you need years and decades and so forth to kind of establish that. So we've never, I can tell you this. People did get the mRNA vaccines back in 2006, right? Because 3 years after SARS-CoV, they just never needed it in real time because it went away through infectious control policies. Those people are still around, and those people are doing just fine, right? The Taiwanese government still puts out data on them because they're the first people to get the mRNA vaccine. So I haven't seen long-term side effects. I think it's a clever way of science, but I get you. Just because I find it, like in awe, I'm reusable with you guys as well. I want to make sure, is it safe though? Like I'm not going to drive a Tesla if it's going to make me crash every 5 minutes. I'm not going to put an mRNA vaccine in me if it's going to cause damage. But the safety reports are incredibly promising. By the way, to just know how transparent they stay with these reports, and Amber, I'm happy to send you the FDA links. Is if you're bored, click on Moderna's, page 54. The independent body wanted to make sure that one of the patients who suffered an arrhythmia was captured. That patient suffered a bad heart rhythm because they were struck by lightning. And those Moderna scientists had to put in their report, they don't think the vaccine caused the lightning struck. But that's what I'm alluding to. That level of transparency is like, it's overkill. It is, because you want to give people the confidence. So good question. That's a great question. And by the way, I know sounds like our time's up, but I'm happy to come back as often as you guys want. Once a month, we'll do it. I want you guys, we're in a pandemic and we need to be able to have information to keep us all comfortable, right? And I say this because at the end of the day, you got to feel comfortable with the science. And there might be tons of other questions that you haven't been able to ask, and I want to give you guys the opportunity. I say this lovingly, because I could easily spend 8 hours of just talking about this virus. Wouldn't be fun, wouldn't have that many jokes. But at the end of the day, whenever I come into settings that, Robin or Amber invite me to, I come in, I'm like, I'm going to limit my conversation. I want you guys to ask me some questions because I know you're having a lot of burning questions. So now I'll stop talking.
Oh, no, I was going to say, well, thank you so much. I could listen to you all day long.
Seriously, thank you so much. I teach biotechnology, so I'm just like, yeah.
Maybe I'll start now, is used within biological laboratories. And the most common use for